Welcome to the Medicine and Machine Learning Podcast. Today, we're diving deep with David Wu. David is a resident physician at Stanford specializing in radiation oncology. He's a co-founder and current advisor at Jaide, a revolutionary health tech startup bridging Paris and the San Francisco Bay Area. Jaide is on a mission to redefine the patient-physician journey with cutting-edge AI clinical documentation and decision support. They make world-class decision-making accessible to everyone. As you may know, David is a co-founder of the Medicine and Machine Learning Podcast and an alumni of my current medical school, the University of Minnesota. We will explore how him and his team are balancing working across continents, pioneering clinical trials in Brazil, and integrating AI into the future of medicine. Plus, did you know he's got some serious skills on the mic? In our conversation, we'll explore what this whole AI revolution means for patients and providers alike. You won't want to miss this one. Welcome to the pod, David.
Thanks, Nathan. I'm proud of you, man. The student has become the master.
No, you taught me a lot, and everything that I do now is pretty much just from listening to you interview so many interesting people. So let's start with a question that you know very well. What brought you to the intersection of medicine and machine learning?
Oh man, I'm on the receiving end now. Yikes. um, it actually started after graduating undergrad. So in undergrad, I was a bio and econ double major at WashU in St. Louis. And then when I graduated, I honestly didn't really know what I wanted to do. I was one of the few friends or the few guys in my friend group who actually probably the only guy who didn't graduate with a real job. I was volunteering at my old lab at UCSF, and I was also working part-time at my parents' acupuncture clinic. So I was just kind of, a little adrift and aimless. And the lab that I worked at, it was a neuroscience, sleep, and genetics lab. So kind of the intersection of those three. It was actually a pretty big moment in terms of intellectual development, research development, or just kind of developing. And I really have to thank my PI at the time, Yinghui Fu. She's listening out there. Really appreciate you, Yinghui. She really, helped guide my thinking and then gave me the freedom to just explore ideas. And then at the time, we were studying short sleep. So, there's some people who only need 4 to 6 hours of sleep a night. It's hypothesized, is there a genetic mutation that allows this? And so we would reproduce this in a mouse model, certain genetic mutations. And so for my job was to score the mouse EEGs. It's a pretty tedious and menial task. It's kind of boring. In an hour, or sorry, in a full day, a mouse has like 8,640 like epochs of like 10-second windows where you have to say, is the mouse awake, non-REM or REM? And so it's pretty boring, and you have to like score for a lot of mice. And there was a guy who released like a neural network sleep scoring algorithm, which saved me a lot of time, and that got me interested in it. And this was like 2015, and then this was kind of before the whole like transformers, large language models, whatever. And that got me really interested in like neural networks. I thought it was really cool. That just kind of stuck with me ever since, and then going into med school, I started med school 2019. People still weren't really talking about AI then. And I was like, oh, wow, I feel like this is really going to impact medicine. Like they're so powerful. That's kind of how I got interested, and then started the MaML podcast then. The first year of the pandemic, 2020, that's when we started the podcast. Originally, we wanted to bring in speakers, but then we couldn't. But then that's how we started the podcast, which ended up being a good thing because it was easier to get more people. After the podcast, residency came around. That it was too hard to do that and residency at the same time. Thankfully, with some fresh new talent like you stepping up, and then continued working on like the AI and medicine research space. And one thing led to another that led to Jaide today, pretty much a project with one of my co-founders, John Emmanuel, who's I did some research with him. He's based in France.
That's amazing. I didn't realize that the pod sort of evolved during COVID when everything was really uncertain, but that was sort of near the beginning of everybody's queuing into the fact that machine learning is going to be a pretty powerful thing, possibly. That's around the time that ChatGPT was released. I'm sure once people started realizing you were like, "Yo, I've been on this for a while. Like this isn't new information," but that must have been interesting to sort of see it blossom before your eyes.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. I wasn't expecting, AI, whatever, everything to take off as much as it has since like 2022, 2023 onwards. It's honestly a little surreal. Sometimes it feels like we're living in a sci-fi novel. But yeah, it's definitely been pretty cool, and I think it's some good timing.
Based off of the Jade website, Jade is a health tech startup based in Paris and San Francisco Bay Area, redefining the patient physician journey with an innovative AI clinical documentation and decision support solution. Our mission is to give access to world class medical decision making to everyone, starting in oncology and then expanding to other chronic diseases like diabetes, kidney failure, and heart failure. In your own words, what is Jade?
So it started out as a research project in my fourth year of med school. Long story short, I got a research scholarship to like travel abroad anywhere, and then I was like trying to find a project. And my first one fell through, and then a friend of a friend was like, "Oh, you should reach out to this guy I know, John Emmanuel." So then I chatted with him over Zoom, and then like within 12 minutes, we had a project decided, and like, all right, let's do it. I'll come to Paris, and then that was that. And then it started out as developing a tool for large language model summarization of patient reported outcomes in oncology. So this was in like March of 2023 when GPT-4, I think, had just came out. And we used the model then, and then we developed this tool that when cancer patients come and get radiation treatment, they need to be seen every week by their doc. And sometimes these treatments last 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, and then they have to keep accurate track of their symptoms. It's been shown in the literature that patients often have their symptoms underreported. Also, in other studies, they've shown that patients who have their symptoms underreported, they actually have worse outcomes, like poor overall survival. And so, what this tool we developed was using patient-reported outcomes, which is a set of validated questions developed by the National Cancer Institute. We give patients these questions that we select, and then we had a large language model summarize it into like documentation ready language. So that was like the initial, like the very earliest stage. And then since then, we've really refined it. We've even tested it out like in a real world setting in a clinical trial in Brazil, from symptom intake to afterwards developing like an assessment and plan. Say the patient's having nausea or vomiting, providing like an initial draft of recommendations. That's kind of what our vision has been so far.
That's pretty amazing, and it seems like something that could really streamline the intake process and save physicians and other providers a lot of time. But I would love to know, why Brazil?
So during my intern year last year, we had the opportunity to do like an international away rotation. Originally, I wanted to go to China, but then at the time, I think it was like a State Department level 3 warning for the country. And then because I was at Santa Clara Valley Medical Center, which is like a county federally funded hospital. So they said, oh, you can't go to China. But I was like, huh, where else can I go? And then at the time, the team that I was on, there was a medical student from Brazil. She was from Rio, and she's like, "Oh, you should go to Rio." And I was like, "Oh yeah, I love Rio. I've been to Rio 5 years before, and I'd always wanted to come back." And so I was like, "Yeah, okay, I'll just look for radiation oncology department in Rio." And so then I looked up the Brazilian National Cancer Institute is based there. I cold emailed them. They said, sure, yeah, you can come for a month. And then I set it up. And then when I was there, they were like, oh, why don't you present to us about some of the research that you've been working on in the US? And I said, okay, sure. And I showed them the tool, and I changed it to Portuguese. They really liked it. They were really impressed by it. They hadn't seen anything like that in their hospital. It was interesting. Like some people, like they like got it right away. Like you can kind of see it in their eyes, like, oh wow, like this is like really cool. We want to try this. And one of the professors in particular, Dr. Hakeli, she was like, let's do a clinical trial here at Inca. And I was like, oh, sure, all right. And so in working with her and one of the residents, we set up like a small pilot clinical trial comparing this tool versus traditional OTV methods, which is when, just doctor with patient talking.
That sounds really interesting. And my old roommate was from Brazil as well. So it's always been a dream for me to go to Brazil at some point. So it sounds like it's worth visiting. Can you talk about some of the preliminary results from the study yet, or are you still keeping that under wraps?
No, that's a great question. It's we're almost done with the data analysis, but to kind of give you some anecdotal evidence, UI UX is very important. It's like a lot more important than I had thought. Just like ease of interface. For example, like some of the patients were like older, like 70, 80-year-old, and they had never used an iPad before or like a tablet because this was like a county hospital in Rio. So like they didn't know that to zoom in, you had to like pinch to squeeze, to like to zoom in. But a lot of them really like that. They're like, oh yeah, like, oh, I didn't know that like nausea could be a symptom or like diarrhea could be a symptom. And like, oh, I am having some diarrhea. And so it would help them remember things that they normally wouldn't mention. And because they're like, they see so many patients that, the doctor, like, oh, what symptoms do you have? And they're like, I think I'm okay. But then in doing this, they're like, oh, actually, I do have these symptoms. Even the doctors themselves, too, they say, like, oh, yeah, like I often forget to ask about like flatulence, and it helps them be more thorough in the care that they provide. So that's been pretty cool to see. That's been my big takeaways is that people enjoy using it, but also number two is that like UI UX is so important.
Could you describe more about exactly like what the process is of using Jade? Is it a voice prompting system? Like, are you speaking with it?
Yeah, no, we're actually working on that next. Right now, it's text-based, but depending on the disease site, like where the cancer is being treated, the symptom the side effects can be different. So we have certain templates, like if you have prostate cancer or breast cancer, then you click that, and then you can edit the questions as you want, and then you send it to the patient, they fill it out, and then you get your summarization that you can just paste into your EHR. So the two things that we're working on is clinical decision support. Like, so for example, if a patient has nausea or vomiting or diarrhea, like kind of just drafting an initial recommendations, kind of almost like what a like an intern or a resident or even a medical student would do. Say like, oh, for their diarrhea, recommend X drug. The other thing that we're working on is instead of questions that they would click, a speech to speech. But that's been a little trickier. That's been more in like the experimental phase, and we're hoping to try it out in the real world setting soon. But that's in the near future.
Yeah, I saw a video of that in like the early stages, I think, with one of your co-founders. He released that on his LinkedIn, and it seemed like it was pretty promising. The voice of it was posh. It sounded
Funny, right? Yeah.
yeah. So that would be a really cool direction. But I would love to talk more about how you think that integrating these tools will affect physicians' training and affect their abilities. Do you feel like, like with when the calculators became widely available, it's people's mental arithmetic skills might have decreased a little bit because of reliance on calculators. Do you think it's possible that this technology could impact physicians' abilities to be diagnosticians or take histories from patients?
That's a really good question that you ask. And I think in general, the story of medicine is in the story of like us developing new technologies, and then it kind of changes the way we practice. Even as like with something as simple as the stethoscope, like people used to like listen to people's backs with their ears, and then they like put tubes on the back instead of doing ear to back. They put a tube there, and now they have like the drum or the bell or whatever, and then with the ear thing. And then nowadays, like it almost feels mostly performative. Like I actually don't. I think there's very few times where you would like actually make a clinical decision based off of a stethoscope finding. Instead you have like X-rays, CTs, ultrasounds. I think that I'd like to think that we would be augmented by it, kind of like back in the days we used to have books and you would reference these books, but now you have up to date and you look up to date. But maybe you have a better form of up to date in the future where you can just ask it questions and it can just tell you directly, an answer that's based off of your previous interactions. It knows like where you are in your training and it can refine its answer. That's like one of my hopes, but one of my worries is that, there's been some recent studies that come out that show that actually the AI alone is better at like diagnostic reasoning than the doctor plus AI or doctors alone. But, those are early studies with like not very many physicians, and it's not like the best study design, but that's one of my worries. But I think my overall hope is that in general, like care for the patient would improve. Like we'll catch things that we shouldn't be missing sooner, and we'll be able to address them earlier and give more time for patients to ask meaningful questions or things that they want to ask. Like, for example, like if they do this pre-visit intake, then as the physician, you going into the visit, you have a little summary, and then you know what to focus on during your visit, which is nice. and you get more out of your time rather than asking the same, like, "Oh, have you had any diarrhea? Have you had any nausea, abdominal pain?"
Man, it's sort of like how programmers now are using Copilot to reduce the amount of boilerplate code that they have to write. It's sort of like now you're just reducing the amount of boilerplate that physicians have to, speak with patients about.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
That's great. So I would love to talk more about how you feel like maybe then we should change medical education with all this technology that's coming. You've gone through medical school, you are now going through the grind of residency while somehow still advising a startup. How do you think that medical education should change with these technologies?
Yeah, I think it should definitely be shortened. I think 4 years now, or well, I don't know. I've been actually been thinking about this, and I think one kind of interesting way to do it would be, what if instead of the MCAT, you just take step one, and or if you pass, then it's like great, you can apply to med school. So that a lot of that, I don't know. I mean, this is kind of half baked thoughts, but
Wait, I'd love to learn more about that actually.
because like when I was taking step one, is like, man, this is you have to learn all this stuff, and then a lot of the resources that you have for it though are like online anyways. Like, you don't need to go to lecture. And not to like bash med school lectures, but like sometimes like, you don't need to learn about like a cell bio teacher's PhD research or whatever. You know what I mean? Like things that they're
Yes.
interested in. I mean, it's interesting stuff, but like, it's not like step one relevant. And not that step one is completely clinically relevant, but I think a lot of the curriculum can be done before med school. Like kind of like an intensive, like 6-month boot camp, you could probably knock it out. So I think it could be shortened that way. One thing that'd be interesting is if you I know some places do this where they have like direct like med school to like peds residency or like primary care residency. That's a good way to shorten it too. So yeah, I do think that like medical education is due for a change, but it's kind of interesting. Like the process of education, it's almost like you're fine tuning your own large language model, but it's like reasoning too. Like you need to learn like clinical reasoning. You just are fed like thousands and thousands of questions as your training data set. I think I did the math. Like I've probably done like over 10,000 questions in med school, which is awful. It's so painful. It's so painful.
Yeah.
Um, but I guess that's like the way you learn. I mean, I don't know. Like it kind of sucks.
It's an interesting point. Do we really need to spend months before med school learning organic chemistry topics that we're never going to use again when we could be doing a more relevant exam in step one? And yeah, I've definitely noticed what you said. I'm sure it was happening when you were in med school, and it probably is just getting worse where students aren't going to lectures anymore and everybody's just studying third-party resources just for the board exams because we realize there's such huge barriers to getting where we want to go. Hopping back to what you're doing now, you're a radiation oncology resident at Stanford. What sort of drew you to Stanford, and how has your time there been so far?
Oh, so I'm from the Bay Area originally. So it's been honestly kind of a dream coming true to come home and be able to train like in the community that I grew up in. But I joke with my friends that like sometimes you can get what you want in life and life is still hard. you know? Or like that's kind of how it feels in residency. We're like, oh man, like it's great to be back. But yeah, like residency is tough, but it's really meaningful. I do really enjoy the work that I do. I remember like day two, like first year med school, like you're going through anatomy and I'm like, why do I ever need to know the pterygopalatine fossa, like where is this in the head? Why do I need to know this? But then it came up on day two of residency. It's like, oh hey, like this patient's tumor is invading like the pterygopalatine fossa. I'm like, oh shit, where is that again? Like, oh man, so it's like, wow, it does come back. And a lot of the things like when we least expected, it kind of sneaks up again. Physics on the MCAT actually is there's a lot of physics in radiation oncology, and so I don't know. It all does kind of come back, but I do really like it. It has been really cool. Like it's like the apprenticeship style, where every 2 months you're with a different attending and you work with them for 2 months. They're almost like different like senseis. You're like a different dojo every 2 months, and then you learn from them. So that's been really cool. But it definitely has been tough to juggle both residency and like trying to like work on this Jade stuff at the same time.
So in terms of, balancing residency and Jade, do you feel like being at Stanford, you've been poised to build a startup while being in residency? Is the culture there something that helps with this process?
Yes, but then it's also, I'm lucky to have some great co-founders. Like, there definitely is a startup environment, but, residency takes up so much time, it's hard to go to, like, these, like, meet and greet events and, like, I'd say, like, yes and no at the same time. Like, yeah, there's a lot of a lot of people interested, but then people get busy, and then, like, it's hard to take things from idea to reality and find that support because you really have to, like, go all in on a startup to be successful, and that's one thing that's been tough for me is, like, realizing, oh, just receding more into an advisor role and realizing, like, I can't do this full time. Definitely can't do this full time. I can't do this part time. Like, more so, like, it just as an advisor role, like, a couple hours a week. And so, relying more on my co-founders there, Camille and Daniil and John Emmanuel. In an academic environment like Stanford, like, there's always people who are interested in the startup thing, but when the pedal hits the metal, you need to find someone who's, like, all in, like, be able to work on this full time and not just like a side project. There's difference between, like, building an academic tool versus like an actual, like, production ready product.
You've sort of seen that shift in companies like OpenAI, where they originally were more research based, academic, and now that they're shifting more towards a product focus, you see a lot of the original team members leaving as they don't really like that direction, or their skills aren't in that direction of product building. While you've been doing this process, have you, especially with, back when you built up the podcast and now you're working on Jade and residency, have you ever faced criticism from the medical community for having so many different interests that are outside of just treating patients? Or have you ever faced self doubt?
Thankfully, not from the community. Yeah, like, no one has criticized me. I mean, I definitely, like, worry myself of, like, oh man, like, am I stretching myself too thin? Sometimes my co-residents joke about it. They're like, hey, David, like, you know, don't forget about us. But, yeah, actually, like, my, like, co-residents have all been super supportive. I think if anything, the most doubt that I feel is, like, from myself. Like, I haven't felt anything from the medical community but support, because everyone knows, like, this is important and that this is definitely gonna be part of the future. But I think it's really hard to do both, to be both clinically excellent and to build for clinicians. At least at this stage of my training, who knows, maybe in 10 years things will be different, but
I'm hoping that, once you're through the grind of residency and you're an attending, I'm sure you'll be able to like make your schedule and be able to really dive into all your other passions.
it almost feels like trying to, like, fill a cup full of water and then design a cup at the same time, like, design the ideal cup while you're filling it with water.
That's an interesting analogy. And the water's just overflowing.
Yeah.
You chose radiation oncology as your specialty. I know you and I have had a few conversations with this in the past, sort of about the things that drew you to it. Could you touch on why you chose radiation oncology, and would you do it all over again if you could?
Oh, I think I definitely would. Yeah, I would choose it all over again. I'd say that for a mix of 3 things, number 1 is just the technology is really cool. You're shooting photons at cancer or electrons or protons, it's pretty cool. And then, you have some really cool technology in it. Number 2, I like the culture of it. I don't know, like, there's a lot of collaboration in it. It's a bit more of like an academic field. Fun fact, like at Stanford, I think of all of the different specialties, the radiation oncology department, believe it or not, has the most academic funding, like research funding.
Wow.
That kind of blew
Wow.
my mind. Like, more than, like, I don't know, ortho and neurosurgery, like internal medicine. No shade to them, but I thought it was kind of cool. I was like, wow, right on. Like, we only have 4 residents a year. We have 16 residents total. We have, like, the most research funding because it's like the culture is very collaborative, it's very academic, it's pretty cool. But finally, like, I really appreciate, like, the most important reason why I like it is I really like the kind of care that we provide for patients, like the relationship that we develop with patients. You're kind of like one of the generals in their cancer care, like they have, like, the medical oncologist is like the main one, but you're kind of one of, like, the special tactical, like, like, you can provide a very, like, specific service, but then you're also involved in, like, the overall big picture planning. And so I like that kind of care where you can really make a difference like for the patient, but then also like it's not too like overwhelmingly broad where if, like from beginning to end it's more so like all right, like this is our intervention that we can offer. So that's really nice. And I do think that cancer it's a very I don't it sounds kinda weird, but it's like almost like there's like a spiritual component or like a psychosocial spiritual, like, where you can really, like, connect with a patient on a deeper level and, like, get to know them, and, I don't know, like, there's, like you can really get to know someone. I hope that kinda makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. It's sort of such a all-encompassing field, and in terms of the spiritual aspect, I'm sure you have to talk with patients and understand what their goals are for
Yeah, because
life.
everyone has a different understanding of their cancer and, yeah.
I know I shadowed pediatric hematology oncology, and it was just I wouldn't say surprising, but it was tough how it seemed like maybe a quarter of the patients we were seeing were mostly just for palliative care. And I think that's where that spiritual aspect comes in, where you really do get to understand patients at that deep level. And that's sort of what makes oncology a beautiful field.
Well said.
Soren asked this question. He asked,
Soren? What did he
yes,
ask?
yeah, he wants to know what your best and worst medical schools slash residency experiences were.
Oh, man, I miss you, Soren. Thank you for that. I think best experience in med school I mean, honestly, my first 2 years, I lived in a co-ed medical fraternity. It was actually a lot of fun because we were, like, locked in one house during the pandemic. We were, like, right on the bank of the Mississippi River. I think winter in Minnesota is really magical. So I just have some really fun memories of, like we had a house of, like, 12 people, and then we just got up to a bunch of different antics. That was a lot of fun. Worst experience of med school was probably studying for step 1.
No.
Maybe step 1. Step 2 was also pretty awful.
Was step one pass fail when you took it?
No, it was scored. It was
No
scored.
way.
Yeah, so
Oh, so that
that's
sounds
probably
so
what
stressful.
Oh, and then I think one time I got, like this is kinda funny, but an attending gave me feedback. This is on my medicine rotation. She said, like, "David seems behind his peers in his fund of knowledge," or something. I was like at first when I got that negative feedback, or I guess it was constructive feedback, it wasn't negative. She just recommended me to study more, and then that was really hard for me, it sounds kinda funny, but, like, my knee-jerk reaction was like, "Oh my god, I'm just gonna drop out of med school. I'm just gonna go to become a monk and retire," or whatever. It was kinda silly, but then, like, 30 seconds later, I was like, "That's stupid, I'm not gonna do that." And then, I don't know, now it's just like, yeah, like, it's like a funny memory now in hindsight.
Did you ever contact her and be like, "Hey, I'm a resident at
No,
Stanford now."
but, I mean, I'm very good friends with the program director at that hospital in the internal medicine department. She knows, and she, like I don't know, we joke about it, we laugh about it now, and, like, yeah, she's like, "Oh, don't worry, David." Like, I don't know, like, yeah. It's a funny memory in hindsight now, and I
Yeah.
think it was helpful. Oh, and then a residency, favorite memory so far? I don't know, sometimes, like, again, I think it's all about the people, like, when it's, like, 6 PM, everyone's still in the resident room, and, like, we just get kinda delirious and start joking around. That's pretty fun. Some of my co-residents are just hilarious, like, the ones in my year are just so funny. And then, worst memories so far, honestly don't really have a worst. There's been some late nights, but, like, I don't know. I think it's just I wasn't expecting there to be as many late nights as there were, but there's definitely been some late nights. So those have been kinda rough.
What's your average amount of sleep?
Surprisingly, actually pretty good. Like, I really try and defend, like, protect my sleep, so, like, get at least, like, 7 hours, but I think the biggest sacrifice I've had to make was working out. Like, I don't have any time to go to the gym now, and it's really sad. I'm really sad about that.
You're not one of those people that can only get 4 or 5 hours of sleep each night, like the people you
No,
researched?
no, no, no.
This is a broader question, but it's a good one to ask, and you're a uniquely poised person to ask this question. Will AI replace doctors?
I don't think so. I think AI will help augment components of clinical reasoning, diagnostic reasoning, decision making. I truly think that there's a deeply like human to human component of medicine that is spiritual or is more kind of like on a deeper level. And that's what I think is like what separates, at least just from me witnessing like different attendings. You know, you work with so many and throughout the course of med school and intern year and residency. And even actually at my previous program director last year, she was telling me like she noticed that like, there's almost like a separate plane. Like you interact with the patient. There is one plane that you interact with the patient on, which is just like, oh, medicine. Like, are you giving like standard of care or like, are you giving the patient the intervention or medicine that they should be getting? That's one plane, and it's very, any reasonable student can get to like good on that plane. But I think there's like another plane of medicine that it's almost kind of like perpendicular to it. I think on that plane, that's where you really see like the difference in care or quality between docs. And I think when patients really like appreciate it the most is when you kind of are on that other plane of like part of it's like spiritual or like that kind of like when you really like connect with a patient and you really like help them with like their perspective on things, or there's sometimes like people just really want to feel heard, and you just really connect with them on that level. I don't think AI will ever be able to do that, or maybe, I don't know. People tell the chatbots a lot of things, but I think that that's where humans have like the most potency, is to really deliver compassionate care on that other level of medicine. And maybe I think AI will help make the other parts like my hope is that it'll simplify. There's that plane of just like diagnostic reasoning, interpreting labs, whatever. I hope AI can help with that and then give us the other space, to just relay. Because I've always seen doctors as, there's that cheesy thing where they say, oh, doctor means teacher in Latin, so you have to be a teacher to the patient. But I do kind of agree. If anything, you have to be like you're almost the intermediary between like the whole body of medical knowledge and technology, and it's like it's honestly this massive like system, this medical system. You're kind of the intermediary between the patient and that system, and you kind of have to explain things. And this sounds kind of silly, but you're almost like that layer of like fine tuning. You know what I mean? You explain things for the patient so that they can understand it, and then like me and my co-residents joke that there are certain docs who hit like sage level, attendings where you're like, dude, they're like sage level, and like you can just feel that they operate on that separate plane, that orthogonal plane where it's like it's beyond medicine. Like sometimes I like like it's one thing to say the right answer, but it's one thing to say it the right answer the right way. And I think that's one thing that like I don't think AI is close to. There's like a mix of style and experience and wisdom and like everything that comes with it.
Man, I really appreciate you for bringing up that sage level point. I think that's something I noticed for the first time like a month or two ago, where I've been shadowing all these different physicians, but there's really only been one or two that I've shadowed where it was just like I was just like on the edge of my seat to like hear what they were going to say to the patient next, just because it was always so interesting the way they framed it, or it was just such a genuinely near perfect answer to their question. And that's cool that you have a term for it. It's like the sage mode from Naruto.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
so then when you make your next Jade model, are you gonna call it Jade Sage then, or?
No, I mean, I also have fears too, because when people introduced the EHR, their big thing was like, "Oh, this is gonna help with a lot of the headaches that doctors face, and that it's gonna make billing more efficient and like documentation more easy." And like, in some ways, it's like made it easier to like communicate between hospitals. But then now, like I think most docs they spend like at least 60% of their day just staring at a computer screen, which is sad. I'm scared about the other edge of the double-edged sword, but my hope is that it'll give docs more time to be in the room, like boots on the ground with the patient and just explain things. Or at least help with just be more thorough, like making sure that, hey, like patient's having this symptom, think about this. Kind of like when you have like a good resident with you on a case. Or sorry, what was the other part of your question? Oh, maybe a Jade Sage mode. Maybe. I don't know. That's the thing. It's like especially with some of these papers coming out which show that these large language models alone are better at diagnostic reasoning than clinicians plus GPT. But granted, it's like kind of flawed study design. Maybe we'll have to see like, the next iteration of these studies. Because in studies, like a lot of the docs, like they didn't know how to use a large language model, or I think it was only with like 4 doctors total or something. I don't know. Like it's early preliminary results.
Yeah, and something you touched on was the double-edged sword of integrating new things into medicine and new technologies. And one thing that I've heard the CEO of Anthropic talking about recently was just the transformative potential futures that we can have with the creation of potentially like artificial general intelligence or super intelligence, whatever you want to call it, but also all these potential negatives that could really cause some pain in the world. But what they're doing at Anthropic is they're intentionally targeting all these speed bumps to hopefully increase the likelihood of the positive future. Do you feel like that's sort of something that we need to do in medicine too? Maybe addressing the downsides of how integrating this into clinical workflows could stem out?
Yeah, and I do think that medicine historically has been a bit more careful, of like relative to software development or like other fields. Medicine's pretty like a bit more of like the later actors. There's a short story that Ted Chiang wrote. He's a sci-fi author, and in the short story, it's actually really short, and I heavily recommend it. I don't remember the name off the top of my head, but it goes along the lines of it's like this near future where AIs have developed so quickly that there's a new field of study, which is just studying like the relics of these AIs. Like it's almost like they developed so quickly they just kind of left humans behind. But then we would study like the relics they leave behind to try and understand like, oh, okay, like this is what they invented at this stage, or like kind of just interpreting their development. And sometimes I just wonder, especially at the rate that intelligence has been developing, one day maybe we'll just be interpreting, kind of what this super intelligence will say, like, oh, for this patient, you should do blah, blah, blah. And then, maybe the role of the doctor is like kind of interpreting, like, okay, like, what was it thinking here? Like, why do we want to do this? And then just like telling the patient, like, hey, we're going to do this because blah, blah, blah. And like, if that makes any sense. Like you're like maybe a lot of the heavy decision making might be outsourced. That's kind of a scary future, but who knows? Looking at the trajectory of how fast intelligence is scaling and developing, I think now like we're at the level of like I think Terrence Tao said that 2 years ago or a year ago it was at the level of like a clueless grad student that like just started like this Anthropic GPT whatever, and then now it's at the level of a mediocre grad student, like a year later, which is crazy. You look at like,
And then what happens when it gets to the level of a PhD researcher? And then what happens when it becomes to the level of an entire department? You
right.
know, how fast are we going to be creating new knowledge in the world? And where will we all fit in? What if there's a future where there really is no point for us to be working anymore because this technology can do a lot of the normal jobs? Where are we going to find meaning as humans?
But I mean, that's ultimately like my big philosophy is like, man, like you just got to enjoy life in the present moment.
Yeah.
It's we're kind of silly, but yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, it makes sense. It's a fun thought experiment, but nobody really knows how it's going to turn out. I have a more selfish question that I want to ask you and get your opinion
Sure.
on. What sort of things went into, you already touched on why you love radiation oncology, but I sort of would love to know more about like what are some of the things that went into choosing a specialty? How did you rule out different specialties? And do you think it's important to think about how the use of AI can be how like it's going to be used in a specialty, or do you think it's just important to just pick whatever specialty you like and then try to apply the AI
Yeah.
tool set to
No,
it?
I wouldn't worry about AI at all. Like, for example, like a lot of people thought 5 years ago that AI was going to replace radiologists,
Yeah,
but they were wrong.
yeah,
Now radiology is like as hot as ever and we can't hire enough radiologists. So I think that, don't think about AI at all. Just think about, do you enjoy the medicine? Do you find it cool? Um,
yeah. So One of the things that you are interested in outside of medicine is music. You've been featured on the MaML podcast with some of your rapping talent. What originally got you into hip hop and rap, and why is it something that draws you?
I wouldn't say was featured, is more so I just published that rap myself, self-featured. I got into it. The very first music album that I ever bought was Outkast, Speaker Box, The Love Below. I was 10 years old, and I just had, like, I had no idea what I just thought the album art looked cool, and I was at Target, and I, like, asked my dad to buy it, and then he bought it. And then in, like, coming home listening to it, I was like, "Oh, what is this? Like, this is so cool," like, and to this day, like, Andre 3000 is one of my favorite rappers and artists of all time. And I think that was really, like, the entryway into it was Outkast, and then I got really into, like, Tupac. I'd say, like, my current top 5 lists or top 3, it's, like, Outkast, Tupac, MF Doom are, like, probably my top 3 favorite. Honestly, Future might be number 4, but,
Yeah.
how I started, like, getting into it was in high school, like, my best friend, he's actually currently a musician. Shout out to Chris. He's living in New York. We would just, like, make music together in high school, or we would, like, rap was just honestly, it was like a form of, like, expression, because you'd be thinking about life, and then it was just fun to, like, over a beat, kinda tell a story or just tell how you're feeling, and then oftentimes it's very funny, when
Mhm.
you, like, get, like, the rhyme right. This sounds kinda silly, but it's like a way for men to be vulnerable with each other,
Yeah.
uh, under the guise of music and expression, and I think it's important for, like, men to, like, be vulnerable with each other, talk about what they're feeling, and not be judged for it, and it's like I don't know, whenever someone's freestyling, it's like pretty much like a non-judgmental space, it's just the fact that you're doing it alone, like, people are like, "Oh, respect for, like, saying what's on your mind." I don't know, that's one of those things that, like, I always, on my deathbed, I like, "Oh, man, like, wish I was a rapper," or, like, if medicine didn't work out, like, oh, I would've and the funny thing is I, like, tried. The first time I applied to med school, like, I didn't get in. I applied to a bunch of MD, PhD programs and got in nowhere, and I was like, "Oh, like, in the time that I have that I'm, like, reapplying, like, maybe I'll try and make some music." So I try to go all in on the music thing, and, like, I bought a microphone and everything, and, like, the funny thing is, like, when I was, like, in a closet, in, like, in my apartment, and then, like, when I put the mic to my mouth to, like, and press record, like, I don't know, like, nothing came out. I was like, "Oh, like, I don't have that much to say," I'm like a suburban Asian kid who grew up, like, pretty nice and comfortable, and, like, "Oh, I don't have, like, that much to say." But I don't know, and then I was like, "Oh, like, man, like, I don't know, like, rap is fun," but I really have a lot of respect for artists, like, I really, like, I think it's so important. I don't know, they're kinda like my heroes, I think they really, like, make meaning out of suffering, and, I think it's a beautiful thing, and yeah, like, maybe my rap career is not over yet, but, I think it's a beautiful thing when it's done right.
Now I understand you a little bit better. I think the reason why you're trying to use machine learning to streamline physician workflows is that one day you won't need a human physician, and then you can just become a rapper to fulfill
That's funny.
your life. But
That's funny. Oh, man.
so it's good to know that you have a backup plan. Speaker Box, is that the album that had The Way You Move on it?
Yeah, yeah, The Way You Move. But I think Andre's part of the album was, I don't know, that part was just really, I still listen to that 21 years later. I still, like, it's one of the most influential albums of my life.
So would love to dive further into what makes you you. A question that we ask all of our guests that
Oh,
you
Lord.
are very familiar with. Dr. David Wu, what gives your life meaning?
Oh, man. Oh, man. It's come back around. I would say, honestly, like, the relationships I have with people, like, one of my best friends from college, Kevin Kozowitz, he once said a phrase like, "My life is just pieces of other people's lives," or "Our lives are just pieces of other people's lives," and that really stuck with me. And yeah, I feel the same way. Is that my life is just pieces of other people's lives, and it's kind of like that network that you're in. That's what gives it meaning. And yeah, like, just the people in my life give my life meaning. Um, yeah. Sometimes I wonder, a couple years ago, I read like Man's Search for Meaning or Viktor Frankl. I think one of his central like theses is like suffering gives our life meaning. I kind of agree with that, kind of. Definitely like when you suffer together with people like your classmates or your teammates, that gives life meaning. But yeah, I'd say most importantly, like the relationships I have with other people.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It's sort of like a tapestry of all of the experiences that you share with other people that sort of comes together to make you you.
Yeah. I'm just a neuron in a network.
Yeah, I know you're quite a deep thinker, philosophical thinker. Is there a specific philosophical work that you keep coming back to?
Yeah.
I know you mentioned Man's Search for Meaning, but is there
That's so
anything that
funny.
you've read that you always think about?
What makes you think that? How
Your email signature.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, I'd say that, honestly, this sounds silly, but, there is a book in the Old Testament. I'm not like a particularly religious guy, but I'd say I'm pretty spiritual. The book of Ecclesiastes, I think is bar for bar one of the most important things humans have ever written. It's just awesome, you know? It's just so beautiful. I think it encapsulates how I feel about life.
I forgot what is mentioned in that book, but
It's like, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Generations of man come and go, but the earth abides forever. Pretty much telling man that just eat, drink, and enjoy the days of your labor under the sun, and that like there's no way that we can understand the works of God, and that it's like the race does not go to the swiftest, nor bread to men of great understanding, nor riches to the wise. Time and random chance happen to us all, and that
wow.
you know.
Wow, that's a bar.
Yeah, it's a var, dude. I'm telling you, like whoever wrote that was a rapper.
It must have been, inspiration for Nujabes or well,
Yeah.
Nujabes was just beats actually, but yeah, so you are a innovator, you are at the forefront of medicine and machine learning. What advice do you have for, people of the younger generations? You're still a young person, but, people younger than you who might be in medical school or undergrads or high school, what advice do you have for them who feel uncertain about their future with the coming AI revolution?
My piece of advice would be I know it seems like we're living in a crazy era, and that it's been an era unlike no other or whatever, but I think at any time in human existence, whatever, like it's always most important to just enjoy life in the present moment. Nothing matters so much that like I don't know, like you just should just enjoy life in the present moment. Like step one is gonna suck, step two is gonna suck, or I don't know, residency is hard sometimes, and like or school or any I don't know. There's just so much suffering in the world, but just to like always remember to center yourself in the present moment and realize that yeah, like I think life is enjoyable and that like just enjoy life. I don't know. It's just like sometimes like don't take things too seriously and just like enjoy life. Go to that restaurant that you've been wanting to go to, or like go watch that movie. Like it's fine. It'll be okay. Like if you don't want to do another question set, just don't do it. You know?
Enjoy life.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, David. This was an amazing conversation, and I honestly wish we could talk for longer, but I don't want to take too much of your day. Where can people learn more about Jade and the other things you're working on?
Yeah. Oh, we got our website, jade.care. You could I'm on Twitter at David JH Wu. Just feel free to reach out.
Great.
Thanks, Nathan. I'm so proud of you, man.
No, I
Student has
appreciate
become the master.
and no, I'm really looking forward to seeing how things pan out. And yeah, you're definitely an inspiration. So keep doing what you're doing.
Thanks, man.